If someone acts and threatens our regime and our territory, we consider it appropriate to use all the means at our disposal. We take this very seriously.
And make no mistake, the autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. Is simply unthinkable.
Everyone is threatened. Today's Russia has a well-stocked toolbox for destabilization.
Europe is not a data. Europe is not given forever. Europe can grow and collapse. This already happened in the past.
But I simply don't think there's enough political will and strength in the West.
Putin is at a strategic impasse. That is clear.
He is playing with fire just as much as other people are. And deterrence works two ways.
Winds of war have been blowing across Europe in recent months, and in parallel to Israel, even if many have forgotten, the war in Ukraine has been going on for 2.5 years now. Putin is militarily and politically far from ending the war on his own terms, tightening alliances with the anti-Western forces and raising the threat threshold. There is an understanding in Europe that the risk of sliding into a world war after over 80 years is present and increasing.
Europe, Finland and Poland should prepare for the worst-case scenario.
We need to strengthen the capacity of the European defense industry and ramp up production of ammunition.
While Putin launches implicit threats, people around him, those close to the government, say this quite clearly.
There will be no return to peace. The West will be forced into peace, when it will again be scared to the extent that it understands there are no other options. For this, we should look for their weak spots and mercilessly, ruthlessly strike them there.
Although the Russian army has significantly weakened, it can still carry out provocations that will challenge the West and test the famous conception of, quote, defending every inch of NATO territory. The fear of Putin, but also of Trump's return, caused moderate Western countries to increase military production and invest more in security.
The NATO allies are this year increasing defense spending by 18%. That's the biggest increase in decades.
If you look at Ukraine, and we all feel so badly about it, but why isn't NATO putting up dollar for dollar with us? We put up $140 billion, and they put up just a tiny fraction of that.
Against the backdrop of Trump's anti-NATO rhetoric and the Russian threat, the member countries are increasing their defense spending. Only 1/3 of countries met the defense spending threshold last year. Their number is expected to double this year.
There is an appreciation that something has changed in a very fundamental way. And importantly, that appreciation extends to those countries that didn't have that appreciation prior to February of 2022.
In Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Baltic countries, the fear is there because they are on front line, or second line, just after Ukraine. In France, in Germany, in Italy, in continental Europe, there is not enough fear. Fear is a good virtue in geopolitics.
Maybe in a year or two's time or longer, Putin decides to go for the Baltic states, which are members of NATO. I would be severely concerned that NATO is not going to help the Baltic states. And everyone I say this to says it's ridiculous if NATO exists as an alliance to defend its members. But I can't imagine in this era, Britain, France, Germany, sending their young men and women to fight and die for an Eastern European country that they haven't heard of.
Europe is preparing for the arrival of Trump and is trying to shape, with considerable difficulty, a certain independence from the US. Today, Europe believes Putin should be stopped in Ukraine before he drags the whole continent in a war. The French president, while faltering politically on the home front, is himself leading a line of ambiguity by not telling Putin What are the things that Europe is not willing to do?
There was no consensus today regarding the decision to officially send military forces. But in practice, we do not rule out any possibility. We will do everything to ensure that Russia does not win this war.
Macron knows that the Ukrainian situation is really tragic, that Russia is a real fascist, tyrannic and probably fascist country. He knows that. He knows the situation.
The fear of nuclear weapons is the main reason for the cautionary policy of the West against Moscow, also dubbed controlled escalation.
NATO's nuclear deterrent is our ultimate security guarantee and our ultimate deterrence.
Currently, the world's nuclear arsenal is estimated to be 12,000 warheads, with the US owning about 5,000 and Russia nearly 5,600. Including inactive warheads. Seemingly, the world has never been at such a dangerous point in time.
The use of nuclear weapons is possible in exceptional cases, only in exceptional cases, where the government and the territory are under threat. We pay attention to what is happening in the world around us, and we do not rule out the possibility of changing this doctrine.
But Washington keeps its nuclear weapons abroad as well. Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium, among others. And since Russia announced the transfer of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, there have been increased discussions on American weapons being placed in additional countries, such as Poland, for the purpose of deterrence.
The reason to think about using nuclear weapons is more to deter the West from engaging in certain activities that he doesn't want the West to do, than it is actually to use these weapons. Because it is the one thing that is for certain will lead the United States and other countries to intervene in this war conventionally. And if and when that happens, Russia will, and no doubt, be defeated soon and swiftly.
In light of the war, there were periods when Russia suffered significant losses on the battlefield. According to estimates, this made the use of nuclear weapons by Moscow more likely. But such a move could be disastrous for Putin and for the important backing he receives.
I don't think he is ready to commit suicide. I also think that China has made very clear that the use of nuclear weapons will be unacceptable, and Russian dependence on China and the relationship with China is important for Putin's future.
Do you think Putin is a rational leader?
Not
anymore. That is, at certain stages, he demonstrates rationality and judgment, but not strategically. He's already emotionally swept away, and to a considerable extent, he lives in an imagined and virtual world. In that sense, he should not have started this war at all, because war is an aggressive and unpleasant collision with reality. No matter what fantasies you have, they collide with reality.
One of the scenarios that may bring back the thought of nuclear weapons is the liberation of Crimea by Ukraine. Galyamov, Putin's former speechwriter, believes that if and when this time comes, Putin will be domestically weakened for such a step.
The question is whether the army will carry out his order. After all, it doesn't work like that when you are alone on the nuclear weapon button.
Though Russia believes itself as a geopolitical center of gravity, above it is a much more significant player, China.
Putin is ramping up yet another offensive against Ukraine, sending wave after wave of Iranian drones, North Korean artillery, and tanks, missiles, and fighter jets built with machines and parts supplied by China.
You cannot supply Russia with vital help to prolong the war in Ukraine. That's a global issue. That's European security. Europeans are our allies. Historically, China always is allied with the world's most troublemaking states, rogue states to be precise, such as North Korea, such as Cuba, such as Iran, such as in the past is the PLO. And so to create strategic distractions, to keep the United States focused on those areas so that we should focus less on China.
作为世界主要大国和联合国安理会常任理事国。
As world powers and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia transformed superpower relations that are quite different from the old Cold War era.
Russia is expanding cooperations as well as its dependence on countries that are hostile to the West, building a counter-military and economic force led by China.
Iranian is not the only proxy state of China right now in its global strategy. In a certain sense, definitely North Korea, obviously, and also Russia, because China is the only country that has enormous economic and financial power and manufacturing capability to make those three countries to work for China's global strategy. Keep in mind, Russia's economy is less than 1/10 of China's. Technologically, China is far more advanced than all the other three rogue states combined.
Russia's impasse in the war is being used by China economically and politically, as well as Iran's and North Korea's dependence on them. Everything is part of its game against America. They see the West's stance against Moscow and draw conclusions on how to act in Taiwan.
What's Biden's message to Israel? Don't strike back. Now, that to me illustrates not just the US, but Western weakness. And we saw the same in Afghanistan. After decades of fighting and supporting Afghan forces and directly fighting ourselves against the Taliban, we then gave up. We left. We packed our bags and we left.
The West lacks diplomatic experience and certainly malicious cunning and shrewdness when it comes to Iran. It's like adults versus kids. They will spin them with deceit, and any agreement that's made with them is destined to be violated.
While Washington is making alliances in Asia and building cross-continental coalitions against the Russian and Chinese threat, there is no clear strategy regarding the third party, Iran, and the policy towards it seems to be weak.
I don't know if I can currently demand this of Israel, who doesn't know what will happen next and what exactly it's doing. I hope there is still a beginning, or at least a dash of understanding that the game has changed drastically. Countries that will not understand the change that we just discussed will be left behind and will pay a heavy price.
In Israel, on the other hand, the Iranian threat is a top priority. But it seems that standing up to Russia and China as part of a Western bloc is not receiving sufficient attention. Israel acts and speaks carefully when it concerns Russia. But despite the cautious policy, we should remember that Russia has long associated Israel with the Western countries. This is indicated by a cartoon on the official website of Russia's Foreign Intelligence, SVR, from December, about 2 months after the start of the war in Gaza.
This poor ragged eagle who hasn't eaten in a while is about to die. That's the American eagle. There's a lion with a British flag hat who also hasn't eaten in a while. That's it, the G7. And as the raft approaches the rock, probably to attack, there are other animals. There's a big giant Russian bear protecting everyone. Behind him is a small Chinese dragon, as if China is a superpower. India, South Africa, a camel symbolizing Saudi Arabia. These are the BRICS countries. And when you zoom in on the image, we suddenly see a parasite on the eagle. What is the flag on this parasite? The Israeli flag. That's it. What else is there to understand? Russia's Foreign Intelligence Agency published under an article by the head of the organization, who must have personally approved it. I'm certain that he approved it and said, excellent, it's terrible. This is a country that absolutely sees us as an enemy